BBC Radio Berkshire, the Four Tops, and Reach Out, I'll Be There. Let's talk now to a band leader, I think it's fair to say, with a difference. Alex Eberhard heads up the All Things Must Pass Orchestra, which returns soon to the Kenton Theatre in Henley. And if you're thinking, fancy naming an orchestra after a George Harrison song, well, it's because they're the only touring band in the UK dedicated to playing nothing but the music of the former Beatle live. And Alex is here live as well now. Hello, nice to meet you.
Hello, Bill. Nice to meet you too.
Take me back to the start of all this then. How did the orchestra come to be?
Well, it was inspired by Concert for George. You might remember that Eric Clapton had organised a concert at the Royal Albert Hall 1 year after George Harrison had died.
Yes, that's right. 2002 that would have been.
That's right.
Yes.
And he invited lots of musicians who have worked with George in the past. And that huge sound inspired me to assemble some of the finest musicians here in Brighton and to get this onto the stage.
Right,
and it was a really good success and a lot of fun as well.
So you went along to that concert just as a member of the audience, did you?
No, I just saw clips of it. So
you didn't even you weren't even there, but you saw the clips afterwards.
I wasn't there, unfortunately. Yeah. I wish I had been there.
But until that point, then, had he stood out for you as a songwriter?
Well, George Harrison's music has stayed with me since I was 13, and then I became a professional jazz drummer and orchestral percussionist. And just a couple of years ago, when I watched clips of that famous concert, I decided to form a band to play this music live.
Right. What was this moment when you were 13 then?
Well, that's when I started out playing guitar, and that was around the time when John Lennon had been murdered, and so that was a really important time for me as a musician, becoming a musician, and George Harrison's music just stood out from all the other Beatles songs.
Because and there would be lots of other great guitar players and writers that you could have been inspired by. Have you ever put your finger on what was extra or different about George Harrison's songs for you?
I think his songwriting is quite quirky, and as it's influenced from his Indian encounters,
yes.
A lot of quirky rhythms and melodies, and it's really challenging and fun to play. And also his slide guitar playing is quite something.
He is fond of the slide guitar, and I've actually looked through our library of what we have of George Harrison, and I've selected something to play in a moment, which contains quite a bit of that, so that'll fit in very neatly. So once you'd had the idea then, how did you take it from there? For the orchestra, I mean.
Well, it's quite difficult to, because as you know, it's a 10-piece band, and it's difficult to find venues that would take a 10-piece band. So I basically had to hire theatres around Brighton in the southeast, and and the audience was very appreciative. And we'd like to take it all across around the country, but it takes time because it's fairly new.
But you are doing. I mean, how many gigs and how far have you travelled so far? Because obviously you're coming to our patch next weekend, aren't you?
I think Henley is the furthest we've been so far. Right. So we kept it quite local at the moment.
Excellent. And I'm guessing that with your band, you just you get them together for the gigs, and then they're freelancers who go off and do other things in between.
That's
times.
right. Every one of our musicians is a full-time professional musician, so it's quite a bit of a challenge to coordinate rehearsals and concerts as well.
Yeah, and you also presumably go off and do your jazz playing, do you?
That's right, yeah.
And what is the lineup? What's the instrumentation?
Well, we've got 3 guitars to cover all the slide guitar parts and all the guitar lines. We've got a horn section of trombone and tenor saxophone. We've got 2 female backing vocalists, keyboards, drums, bass, and that's about it. So
right.
10-piece.
Now that's everything apart from lead vocals, as far as I can.
That's right.
out.
Yeah, that's myself. And I play guitar in that band. So although I'm a jazz drummer, I've never stopped playing guitar, and I like it equally well.
Right. And do you, to any extent, attempt to sound like George?
No. I really want to point out this is not a tribute band. Although it pays tribute to his music. But you couldn't say that the musicians at Concert for George were a tribute band. So if you know that concert, that's pretty much what we're about. There are no silly wigs or trying to look alike and totally emulate.
I mean, do you go to the other extreme? Do you deliberately try to find your own way of doing these songs so that people won't think you're aping George?
Well, there's some solos and some arrangements that we take our liberties, but it sticks on the whole, I think, to the spirit of the song. And true George Harrison fans are not disappointed because it sticks to what George has put out first.
But vocally, how much or how little is your voice like George's?
It's difficult for myself to judge, but we had a review from a concert, and the journalist pointed out that it's just different enough for it not to be, like a sound-alike tribute band. But I think it's close enough to do the songs justice.
You've got it just right then. That's terrific.
I hope so. I would think so.
What are the songs that you wouldn't dare leave out of a performance?
Well, the obvious hits that George wrote for the Beatles, so Something, While My Guitar Gently Weeps, and Here Comes the Sun, and also, of course, My Sweet Lord has to be in, but we'll have about 8 different songs to the ones we played last year in Henley. So there is so much material that we still haven't explored, so it's really fun. Fantastic. For any musician to work on that.
So 8 new ones, and how many songs in total do you get through during an evening?
There are about 22 songs in the whole show.
Wonderful, wonderful. Do you play Give Me Love, Give Me Peace on Earth?
That's one of the songs that we dropped. We did it last year because that's the one that needs 2 slide guitars.
Yes,
and that's good fun. But we had to make a decision to drop some songs to put some new ones in. So that's unfortunately one that we will not be playing this year.
Right. Well, shall we play it now instead then, eh?
Please do. It's a great song.
All right. Stay right there, and we'll come back and talk some more on the other side. BBC Radio Berkshire. BBC Radio Berkshire playing George Harrison and Give Me Love, Give Me Peace on Earth, and doing so because Alex Eberhard is our guest today. He is the band leader of the All Things Must Pass Orchestra. If you didn't know, that is the title of a George Harrison song, and the band is so named because they play nothing but George Harrison compositions. And they're returning to the Kenton Theatre in Henley next, i.e. not this coming, but the weekend after, for the second time. And I don't know what you think, but I don't know where to start with that song, really, in terms of how much I like it. I love the ending for a start. That's a bold ending, Alex, isn't it?
It is, but that's some of the charm of George Harrison songs. It's very unusual.
You never quite know what's coming next. And then there's that lovely, and give me hope, and give me hope, and give me peace on earth, where he plays about with the rhythm at the end there.
Yeah.
Great little song. So you're an Austrian, correct?
That's right, yeah.
And you see, it might sound like a naive question. I'm sure the Beatles were massive everywhere, but how big was George during your formative years in Austria specifically?
Well, I'm a bit too young to have experienced the Beatles when they were still together. Right. So, as I said, 1980, that was the time when I discovered the Beatles for myself. And for some reason, George Harrison just stood out. So I can't really put my finger on what it was that appealed to me in the first place.
But I'm assuming that the Beatles took Austria by storm, as far as you know, like they did everywhere else in the world.
Like everywhere else, yes. And I'm sure they're still big there as everywhere else.
Yeah. So tell us a bit more about your path to where you are now then. There are certain jobs that you can have an apprenticeship for, but playing jazz, it's not quite like that. It's all a bit kind of messy and informal, isn't it?
Well, there are really good colleges these days where you can study. And I started off with classical percussion studies at Music University in Graz in Austria. Uh-huh. And once I had finished that, I decided to do another 4 years of jazz drumming at this university.
Gosh.
And when I had finished that, I was just frustrated because I was working full-time as a guitar and drum teacher, but didn't have that many jazz gigs in Austria, and that's when I decided to come to England, which was 14 years ago.
Right, and where did you base yourself? It's got to be London or the southeast, presumably?
Well, it's around Brighton, yeah.
Oh, you've been a Brightonian all this time, right? Yeah.
Around Brighton. I was in Worthing first, then in Brighton, and just moved to Seaford.
And was that because there's a thriving jazz scene in that part of the UK then?
There are a lot of great musicians down here, yes, yeah.
So you got the gigs pretty soon, did you?
Yes, I
What
was
came
really
right for you?
fortunate.
Yeah.
After my second week in the country, I had a residency with a band in Brighton, so I was quite fortunate. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
thank you.
They say, of course, that you learn to drive, and the day that you actually pass your test is the day that you start to learn driving. Was it a bit like that with studying music
Yes,
technically and then having to do it, in a smoky club?
absolutely.
Right.
That's even more true for playing jazz. You can't, as you say, you can't really learn jazz on your own at home. You just have to get out and play.
So would it have been better in hindsight not to have gone down the academic route for that?
I don't know, because I work also as a session drummer, and being able to read music and to understand music from a harmonic point of view as well really helps.
Yes.
Having your fingers in many different pies, as I do.
What about with the piano and the guitar? Did you do those the formal way as well? Because guitarists very often don't read, and they just kind of learn in their bedroom, whereas pianists probably more often do have lessons and read the dots, I think.
Well, I learned classical guitar when I was about 14 till 18, and so jazz guitar and also the sort of guitar playing that I need for George Harrison's music I learned just by myself.
Right, and is that easier to do because you've had the classical guitar training, do you think?
Oh, it's difficult to say. Again,
Maybe it
it
fights
helps.
it, I don't... Oh, you think it helps? Right.
It helps being able to read music.
Yes.
Yeah. To memorize lines.
I'm a reader, and I'm amazed that one of my friends, who is a very famous piano entertainer, cannot read a note, and Roy Wood of Wizard and ELO fame, and of course Paul McCartney, one of the Beatles.
Yes, that's true.
Was George a reader? I know Paul wasn't a reader.
I don't think he was. And I don't think he was, but that's
incredible.
In his songwriting, some of the charm that he just approaches it from quite a unique angle, not being biased by theory.
Well, there's a lot of truth in that, I think, because I used to have a songwriting partner, and he was guitar-based, and I'm keyboards-based, and I do think pianists write different sorts of songs to guitar people. I don't know if you'd agree with that, first of all.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
You can hear it in the chord structures and so forth.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, because he was completely self-taught, he didn't know any of the rules, and he would say, let's jump from there to there, and I'd say, we're not allowed to do that.
Yeah.
And he'd say, well, don't you like how it sounds? And I'd say, well, yeah, I do. He said, well, let's do it then. So I think probably a combination of the two is the best you can possibly get.
Yeah. Well, the rule is if it sounds good, it is good, no matter what the rule.
But sometimes if you're classically trained, you can't make your head believe quite that it sounds good because you know how naughty it is.
Yes, yeah.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
What's the ultimate aim then with the orchestra and for you generally as a musician?
Well, to develop it to a stage where we can tour it around the country and maybe take it abroad as well, which will be a big step.
Very good. I wonder where in the world do you have anywhere in your sights particularly?
Well,
I mean, they love George in many countries, of course.
Well, I would think that Germany, France, and Holland that'd be a good point to start. But we do have some fans from Japan even, and a gentleman from Italy who travelled to Henley last year with his son specifically for the concert, and he will come back this year for both shows. So there are some fans out there.
That's great, isn't
dedicated.
it? What a good chap, yeah. Are you recording this music? Because you could send, you could buy a copy, and I'm not saying don't come again, sir, but that would kind of spread the appeal, perhaps.
Well, we've just done a video shoot.
Great.
That you could have a look at on our website,
which is
www.allthingsmustpass.co.uk. And you can have a look.
What's that got on it?
Well, we did Let It Down, which is a track from the All Things Must Pass triple album, and we had a filmmaker doing quite a nice atmospheric video with us.
Right. Final thought, do you think he was lucky to have been one of the Beatles, or do you think he was overshadowed as a writer because of Lennon and McCartney?
I think he was overshadowed. It probably must have been a bit frustrating towards the end of the Beatles era that his songs were discarded. That's why he came out then in 1970 with All Things Must Pass, had a lot of songs that were rejected. And there are even some demos where the whole Beatles did All Things Must Pass. The song, but it didn't
never made
the
it.
Beatles album.
No. We'll have a lovely time at the Kenton Theatre in Henley next weekend. Two shows. Is that 2 in one day or 2 nights?
No, on the 10th and the 11th, so Friday and Saturday.
Friday and Saturday.
And Bill, if you would like to come, you're very welcome to be our guest on one of the shows.
I'll see what I can do. Thank you for that. In the meantime, allthingsmustpass.co.uk is the website
That's right.
to find out more. Very interesting and slightly different interview, which I've much enjoyed, Alex. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bill.
That was Alex Eberhard, and this is BBC Radio Berkshire. Your travels on the way.